This video is sponsored by SKILLSHARE. Hey guys, before I get started, I wanted to give the announcement that I'm very close to revamping my Patreon to be even bigger and better. There's going to be a whole bunch of new stuff like a Discord channel for writers to find beta readers and discuss fiction, and also more ways to get in contact with me personally. I'm really excited for all of it to go down. The Discord will probably need moderators, so expect some calls for that too. As always though, I would be super appreciative if you guys went and supported on Patreon if you like my content, even if it's just at like the lowest $2 tier. Anything that you give on Patreon is greatly appreciated, and I promise I am doing my best to make it worth it for you guys. However, you didn't come here for a charity case. You came here to lovingly waste your time with me in talking about kids' cartoons. And of course, like anything nowadays, this idea was started with Puss in Boots. I was watching clips and reading discussions about the film because I'm weird and that's how I spend my free time, and one of the things that stuck out to me was how tonally horrifying the film is as a whole. Now granted, the movie is amazingly well done, I think. It's never depressing and it never feels like a chore to watch. But ultimately, there is this looming terror that's always just behind all the crazy adventures and wacky hijinks that the characters are involved in. The wolf is the largest part of this, obviously, and mainly because he's always like literally lurking in the background seeking to murder our hero, but the dark and looming tone is constructed by even more components than just the wolf. It's Jack Horner's utter psychopathy, Goldilocks' familial trauma, and Kitty's broken heart. These elements simmer just under the surface, never as the main source of focus for the narrative, but definitely the main source of fuel for both the conflict and the horrifying tension that builds over the runtime. Puss in Boots, much like its main character, is soft and cuddly on the outside, but far more serious and thought-provoking underneath. In this movie, this kids' animation acts as maybe the current pinnacle of a narrative style of children's fiction, where the innocence and inviting nature of animation is used to deliver a more existentially horrifying experience than live action ever could. The execution of the storytelling style is complicated, and I'm sure many of you guys would like to accomplish it in your own writing. Luckily, earning that task is made easier with today's sponsor, SKILLSHARE. So much of how I operate this channel is based in learning about writing. I love the idea of creating simple, understandable videos that can help someone with whatever story they're working on. And similarly, SKILLSHARE exists for that exact same reason. SKILLSHARE is an online learning community with thousands of classes to help you invest in your personal growth. If writing is your jam, they got you covered. They have classes on short story writing, character-driven stories, setting a writing routine, and the list really goes on and on for a multitude of other subjects and passions. And it's not just writing content. SKILLSHARE has classes in freelancing, entrepreneurship, marketing, social media, and more. One of my favorite instructors is Mike Lacker, who is an editor and writer like myself, and he has a really great class on how to write funny for the internet, though I might be a bit biased on that subject seeing what I do for a living. In any case, because I'd like to hook you guys up, the first 500 people to use my link will get a 1-month free trial of SKILLSHARE. This way there's no real risk for you to try it out. So go ahead and look for that link below to start your journey of learning today. But back to those animations and the existential horror they represent, we are actually going to have to take a step back from Puss in Boots and travel a few years in the past to see where the roots really lie. Animation and the storytelling associated with it has been a staple of childhoods and adolescence for decades now, dating all the way back to the golden age of the 90s where cartoons dominated children's fictions. It still blows my mind that some of y'all watching weren't around to experience this yourselves, but for those of you who were, you probably remember the heyday of shows like Recess, Dexter's Laboratory, Batman the Animated Series, Powerpuff Girls, and literally so many more that I'd have an easier time holding my breath for an hour than naming all of them. So many of these kids' cartoons existed with a very particular narrative focus in mind. They were meant to be light, humorous, adventure-driven, and above all else, ridiculous. Stuff like Rocko's Modern Life, Rugrats, and Cat Dog, when looked at face value, are so freaking weird. But these shows and their ridiculous natures were largely meant to play on both the innocence and open-mindedness of their young audiences. Kids have wild and crazy imaginations, not bogged down by the sometimes depressing burdens of adulthood, which means these ludicrous animations and their wacky premises were normal to kids in the same way that dramas are normal to us adults now. But even with these early shows that became the bedrock of kids animation were specific cartoons that laid the seeds for the existential horror that came to be so popular now. I'm talking about the cartoons that weren't just wacky, surreal adventures, because technically, like, all cartoons are strange. I'm talking about the purposefully bizarre and uncomfortable cartoons. These are what I call absurdist cartoons, like Ren and Stimpy or Cow and Chicken. These shows were made with the express purpose of capitalizing on the absurdity of what children found funny. They were meant to be gross out and over the top, but their influence was great enough that many other foundational shows clearly took inspiration from them. The humor was purposefully surreal and repulsive, not for any larger narrative statement, but simply because kids are surreal and sometimes repulsive. Again, though, these shows were not existentially horrifying, just really weird. Yet they paved the way for the gradual progression towards what we know today, and that next step on the road are what I call the occult cartoons. The occult cartoons are those centered on, or at least featuring, the mystic, the evil, the alien, and the monstrous, though in mainly a kid-friendly fashion. The occult cartoons purposefully chose characters from iconography that kids were scared of and defanged that horror by presenting it as wacky and zany. Gabor Ksupo, the creator of Real Monsters, said that his inspiration for the show came from his own children loving silly representations of monsters. Still, the occult cartoons proudly marched on with the tradition of purposely grotesque, repulsive, but eye-catching humor that the absurdist cartoons started. Invader Zim, a show containing an episode where Zim literally starts overflowing with human guts, was specifically made because Nickelodeon wanted a show similar to Ren and Stimpy. Billy and Mandy was inspired by Cow and Chicken, partly because they even had like the same writers. But early drafts of the show had Grimm actually as the devil, but Cartoon Network forbid another devil character after Cow and Chicken's red guy, so Grimm became the Grim Reaper instead. The occult cartoons used aliens and monsters and demons to craft the basis for even crazier adventures to throw at the main characters, but to also intimately acclimate kids with traditionally scary material, but not have them be frightened by it. Where early animation almost uniformly focused on either animals or children engaging in relatively simple tasks, the occult cartoons would go on to ignite a wave of animations that openly dealt with more mysticism and alienness without having to rely on the grotesque. Danny Phantom and Ghosts, Ben 10 and Aliens, Jackie Chan Adventures and Spirits, Fosters and Imaginary Friends, and so many more. But occult cartoons were not alone in paving the way for future animations, especially those that would provide existential horror. Their partners in crime were actually on the big screen, and these are the animations I put in the category of terrifying realism.
Destroy Esmeralda, and let her taste the fires of hell, or else let her be mine and mine alone.
Notre Dame stands tall to this day as one of the darkest animated movies ever to have been made, and so it's a perfect representative of the horrifying realism category. These movies represent a trend in fiction that fully adopted the harsh realism of gritty dramas, just told within children's movies. These are films like Atlantis, Road to El Dorado, Fern Gully, and Sinbad. Movies in this category were not concerned with child-specific concerns like toys or monsters under the bed. They centered their narratives on truly deep human conflict, trauma and pain, love and self-sacrifice. These movies were technically aimed at kids, but were told for adults, and this was many people's first foray into a narrative based in real conflict and real consequences that didn't shy away from the harsh realities of humanity, just in animation. And while these movies were not realistic, because they were all based in highly fictionalized settings, their messages were based in realism because of the struggles of the characters going through those events. And those struggles almost always culminated in a horrifying supernatural climax. Hexus turned into death incarnate. Jekyll Khan used blood magic to control a giant jaguar. Rourke became a crystal demon, and Frollo figuratively and maybe literally fell into hell. Animations of horrifying realism always utilize their supernatural climaxes as allegories for the conflicts of the characters. As children, we would see the horrifying results of their terrible actions, and what this did was allow kids to understand that these topics and subjects could very well be broached within animation. No longer were we restricted to an innocent, soft, restrained look at the human condition. Both kids and the studios that produced the animations realized that they could go further than before in telling stories of true consequence. Stories that made you uncomfortable not with disgust, but by a serious investigation of what makes us tick as humans. And it was the general progression and combination of all these different animation eras that brought us to what we have currently, the existential horrors. However, that doesn't mean this style of storytelling is new. It's only refined. Existential horror in cartoons has been around for decades. One of the most famous cartoons of all time is possibly the prototype for the genre, Courage the Cowardly Dog.
Abandoned as a pup, he was found by Muriel, who lives in the middle of nowhere with her husband, Eustace Bay. But creepy stuff happens in nowhere. It's up to Courage to save his new home.
Though the show came out almost 25 years ago, it still sits firmly in the minds of many of the people who were once kids when they watched it. Existential horror is all about the terror of simply being. Existential horror relies on the discomfort of knowing something is wrong, knowing that things are far more dangerous and deep than they appear, but not really being able to put your finger on why until it's too late. Courage the Cowardly Dog constantly is chock full of these surreal, terrifying, uncanny valley characters that always presented a threat to the simple life Courage had with Muriel. The horror of the show wasn't necessarily based in jump scares, but in the notion that something shouldn't be is coming after you. Whether it be the naughty episode, the mystery burgers made by pigs, or the infamous Return the Slab episode, there was always unrelenting tension. All Courage wanted, the goal of the show, was to simply exist peacefully. Yet the conflict became him surviving the horrifying threats that his reality pushed his way. But as I said, Courage was the prototype as a show. The formula would continue to be shifted down the line, notably so by the marvelous misadventures of Flapjack. Here, Courage's formula was twisted on its head. Instead of a normal existence constantly being assailed by strange characters, Flapjack's approach to existential horror was to have existence itself be horrific. Everything and everyone in Stormalong Harbor is just off. Flapjack acts as our grounded center to keep everything relative, though. He is a normal, innocent, kindly little boy. But it's through his normalcy that everything else is allowed to shine so strangely. The show combines elements of both the absurdist cartoons with its repulsive humor and animation, while also using facets of the occult cartoons with its depictions of demons and killers. Flapjack as a show is so weird because everyone in it acts like the events are normal. The existential horror comes from the reality that for these people, this is all life will ever be, and for us watchers, that is a deeply uncomfortable notion, but one that is hard to look away from. Still, I think the cartoon that perfected the formula that we all know and love today, the giant that fictions like Puss in Boots was able to stand on, was Adventure Time. It took the components of the previously mentioned shows, Courage and Flapjack, and merged them with the components of terrifying realism to craft a near-perfect version of existential horror. Finn, like Flapjack, is a regular human boy that grounds us in normalcy. He has his companion Jake, just like Ren had Stimpy and Chicken had Cow. Except instead of grotesque visuals and constant terrifying enemies, Adventure Time's artistic style is adorably inviting. Everything is round and bright and soft. The characters are nice and even the villains are silly. Adventure Time has this charm and frivolity that beckons to your inner child. It's the freedom of limitless adventure in a new land with new people and creatures you could only imagine. But all of that is done so specifically and brilliantly to make you let your guard down. This is because Adventure Time also takes cues from both the occult cartoons and those within the terrifying realism category. Beneath the happy-go-lucky surface of ooh are demons and aliens and gods. Mysticism is intertwined with everything in the show, but it's all grounded with the terrifying realism that the supernatural has lasting consequences for these characters. Ice King and Marceline are deeply hurt people because of their immortality. Finn goes through waves of severe loneliness because he is the last human. Every silly aspect that initially just came off as a cute part of the show is opened up to be cavernously deep and complex. And that makes it so that every time you see something cute, you immediately consider that it could belie something terrible.
You are by far the most evil thing I've encountered. Offer your soul to me, Dark One.
Quack, quack.
No! You can't have my soul! I don't even... Look, just get in here.
Nothing exemplifies this better than the setting itself. The land of Oo is the product of an apocalyptic cataclysm. All the splendor and whimsy you see around you is a product of incalculable death. A lich born from the suffering and destruction of humanity is biding its time to destroy existence.
There is only darkness for you, and only death for your people. These ancients are just the beginning. I will command a great and terrible army, and we will sail to 1 billion worlds.
And all this comes together to create the true existential horror that the show does so well. The horror doesn't come from everything being terrible all the time, but from things actually being good, with nice people who aren't all monsters or weird, gross caricatures. And because we can get invested and know these things are good, the looming threat of them all being destroyed is made even worse. The existential horror comes from knowing that the existence that everyone calls home is fleeting and finite and vulnerable. It comes from knowing that the characters, and by extension, we watchers, have to make the best of a sinking world built on bones. Yet paradoxically, it also comes from the fact that we can still derive hope from everything around us, and it's that hope that can both terrify us for fear of loss and invigorate us for what we might accomplish. I think, at least for us kids who have turned into adults, that's a really real ideal to grapple with, because it reflects what we're dealing with now. The innocence that we knew of the world is gone, and now we can see just how crappy everything is and has been. Yet that doesn't stop us from continuing on. It just makes the idea of building on tainted ground a bit more anxiety-inducing. Other pieces of art have tapped directly into this idea of representing the world as wonderful and cute while secretly hiding a more serious underbelly. The most famous recent one is the Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared series, which is possibly the most literal representation of this existential horror style of storytelling. And even though I haven't seen them all the way through, I've heard the Fiona and Cake series, Steven Universe, and others are carrying forward the torch as well. Puss in Boots is the most recent animation to use this approach to existential horror. Cute on the surface, bizarre in practice, occult in conflict, and terrifyingly real with its message and theme. There is hidden depth to every character that appears, a demand that makes you take the silly seriously, but not because the narrative beats you over the head, but because there is an emotional reward for doing so. Existential horror, as weird as it may sound, is a bittersweet thing. There will always be an uneasy discomfort to your life. There will always be some threat or conflict off in the distance that worries you. Your mere existence will be hard sometimes. But the goal should not be to pretend that hardships and horrors don't exist. The goal isn't to be absurd, so nothing matters, or seek friendship behind every enemy. The goal should be to face the horrors of existence in order to appreciate the beauty of what has managed to survive and thrive around you. Thanks for watching all the way until the end. Make sure to check out our sponsor, SKILLSHARE, for your free month of writing content. If you like what you heard, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. I actually have editing services too for books, novels, and scripts, so check out my link below for that. I also have a TikTok, check that out too. As always, it was a pleasure, and I'll talk to you all again soon.